Well, and as we were preparing for this and reflecting on the seasons, we also talked about the elements.
Mm.
Fire, wind, water, air, all of them. We don't have control over the elements. So
That's
we
true.
can do the best we can, but they come in and create their own dance to teach us lessons. And as you say, if we're open to it, can be refined by it, right?
Yeah.
It's the same in a glider. You can go up and go up forever. And then other times we call it a sled ride. That plane is not staying up in the air, but you still need strategy to get it down.
That's right.
Because it doesn't have a motor, right? And you have one chance to land. So it's interesting.
And here I live in California now for the last almost 30 years. And, we have fire. And one of the amazing things about the big pine trees, about the big redwoods, is that they require fire for the seeds to grow. They require the heat of fire every once in a while to clear the brush and to open the seed so that it can grow. And so there's this purification that happens through the fire, through the wound, through the pain in our life. But that thing allows, not in spite of, it creates the growth that we have.
Welcome to Inspiring Heartfelt Conversations. My name is Barbara Morningstar. This series is presented by In Autumn's Cocoon, which offers workshops and talks on a range of end-of-life subjects for healthcare professionals and the public to provide greater awareness and enhanced end-of-life tools. For more information, you can go to inautumnscocoon.com. Today, my guest is Scott Shute. Scott's mission is to change work from the inside out by promoting mainstream conscious business practices. His latest venture, Changing Work, seeks to curate the best practices of conscious business and make them more widely available. He is the author of the award-winning book, The Full-Bodied Yes, as well as a keynote speaker, and works with executives to develop high-performing conscious organizations. Prior to this, Scott managed a team of over 1,000 employees at LinkedIn as a customer's operation VP before switching roles to combine his longtime passions with his practical leadership and operational skills as head of mindfulness and compassion programs. He's also a dedicated husband and father, enjoys playing acoustic guitar, does landscape photography, which is we're going to draw on today, and loves riding anything with two wheels. So, Scott, I'm going to call you a true Renaissance man with all those different
very good,
skills. Yeah, and so welcome. I'm so grateful that you're going to do this with me today.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Hi, everybody.
So specifically, what we're going to do, as I said, is draw on your beautiful nature photography and explore the seasons, all the seasons of life, perspective, and then weave that into compassion, both in life and in the workplace. But before we go into these beautiful images and the theme, as we prepped for this, I said to you, remember, this is a platform where we're exploring death, dying, and grief. And I want to just ask you, as that kind of landed more deeply on your heart and being, what got stirred for you?
Sure. Thanks for asking. It's a little bit of an uncomfortable topic for me. As a kid, when I was 8 or 10, I'm the youngest of 5, grew up on a farm. My mom used to go visit, first her mother-in-law, my dad's mom, and then her aunt, not my dad's aunt, really, as they were end-of-lifing. They were in the nursing home for probably 7 or 8 years between the two of them. And I had to go along, and had to is the right word. I didn't want to. I didn't like being in there. I didn't like being surrounded by old and dying. And so as we've been talking about it and thinking about it, and as I'm getting older as well and becoming closer to that age than my 10-year-old self, having to come to grips with it and becoming more comfortable. And so I'm, this whole journey is part of becoming more comfortable. I would say I'm not. And so thank you for the opportunity to explore it. But it's not my zone of genius.
Well, but I thank you for being honest about that, because you're not alone. The joke with in my work is you go to a cocktail party and everyone's talking to you and having a good time. And then when you tell them what you do, it's about death and dying. The whole cocktail party moves to the other side of the room. So I applaud your bravery for stepping into this conversation and being a leader and opening this conversation in all platforms of life, including work, right? So.
And thank you for the work that you're doing. I appreciate it.
Welcome. Okay, so photography.
Yeah.
We ended up connecting by an interesting series of events, and I kept saying, your photography. So it's stunning, Scott.
Thank you.
So what drew you to the camera and landscape photography?
Well, as I mentioned, I grew up on a farm, and, we were very isolated from the rest of the world, really. And so, I had friends at school, but most of the time, what I realize now is most of the time, nature was my primary relationship. Nature was my best friend. I spent a lot of time just roaming around with my black lab, just out in nature. And I've always had, I would say I always have a connection to the divine. And I see the divine. What I'd say is I feel most closely connected to the divine when I'm out and really in tune with nature. And so I think I've always had an artistic eye, but I'm not great at drawing or painting or other things. But I found that photography was a nice blend of my skills. There's the composition part, which I think I do pretty well at. And then there's the technical part. And, I got an engineering degree. There's a part of me that's very analytical and very process driven. And so I really just enjoy the combination of all of those things, of especially landscape photography, being out with nature at sunrise and sunset. Usually those times are very peaceful because the rest of the tourists or other people aren't there. And so it's me and my camera. And then there's the technical aspect of just like being able to solve the puzzle. How do I do this right now to capture a beautiful image? And then it's coming back into, not my dark room, but my light room at home with my computer, and then making kind of the final edits. And this is where things really come alive and all together. So I just love all of that parts of it. It uses all of me to create this art.
That's beautiful. Beautiful. Well, and what a lovely reflection of your relationship with nature now to enter into a discussion around the seasons, right? And the intimacy of that connection, because the first season is spring.
Yeah.
And on your page, you have a little section called Intimates. And the first image we're going to talk about is the beautiful photo of the iris. Can you tell me why you picked the image of the iris as a representation of spring?
Well, first of all, one of the things that happens is, this work, the work of landscape photography, often requires you to be in some far-flung place and travel, and usually some famous, beautiful national park or site. But sometimes we can't do that. We don't have that option. And so I still love to do it. So I would find myself, I got a macro lens, which is a lens that allows you to get really close. And just on a walk with my dog in the neighborhood, finding beauty. And that to me, just this art of finding beauty in the everyday, literally walking past it every day, twice a day, walking the dog. And so first of all, there's this idea that it's everywhere. Now, for spring, I think of flowers as being the what do you call it? The spokesperson for spring. We think of spring as like it's in bloom, even the language we use around spring. And so I love this in this particular case, this iris, that is in full bloom. It's in perfection. You know, it hasn't faded. It's all the way open. And so everything is possible here. And then this idea of going and looking at it in a different way than I had looked at it before. And so, I don't know. I really love this image. It really speaks to me.
Well, just the way you've done the photograph for me, it just drew me into not only the beauty, but the sensuality and the expression of that kind of feminine essence too, and spring is procreation and planting seeds too. And so it shows itself, right? To say, let's celebrate this and create something together, right? So
that's right. Yeah. And, you know, you think of all the other things that happen with spring. So I imagine, you know, these little yellow, looks like almost like some sort of sea creatures, you know, where I don't know all the names of the inside of flowers, but the bees and the insects come here to get their joy, their nutrients. And so I just imagine this being, you know, a feeding ground for bees and other things to come and be nourished.
Well, and you have in the broader view of your photos a number of images of the bees coming to the flowers. They're the pollinators, and the hummingbirds too, many pollinators at that time. So the second one is a unique perspective on us. Well, you tell me about it. Tell me, we're going to put it up there, and you tell me why you were drawn to come at the flower from this angle.
Sure. I was photographing sunflowers, and I spent a lot of time, you know, in the traditional way, photographing the yellow flowers in the front where the seeds are. But then I realized the way the light was hitting the back of the sunflower, I found even more interesting. You know, and again, it's these places that we don't notice so much. So in the stalk of this sunflower are all these little hairs, these little fibers. And there was a little mist, and the sun was shining right on them. And I thought, this is way more interesting to me than the normal yellow flowers. And so, you know, I just kind of got lost for an hour or so, just taking the picture of the back of the sunflower. And, I don't know. I think that life sometimes, this is where the beauty is looking in the unexpected places, the places we don't look at every day. And I enjoy that part of my photography too, is to try to find something that is new or different, or that I haven't seen in the same way.
Well, and it also shows the strength of the stem of the sunflower. You see its brilliant face, but you don't always see the strength and of the stem itself. And what you probably didn't know in just organically picking the sunflower is that the sunflower is actually one of the universal symbols for hospice.
Really? I did not know that.
And because it follows the light.
Yeah. It's also, you know, I grew up in Kansas. It's the state flower of Kansas as well. So it has several deeper meanings for me too.
And many seeds highlighted in the center, because spring is a time of planting and planting seeds, and not only new life emerging, but seeds being planted as well, right? So the final one, I believe that one is is that in Yosemite with the light coming? So explain to me why you picked that one for spring.
Sure. It's something interesting, similar that was happening. You see the bridge in the left side of the picture, and this bridge is stacked with people, hundreds of people, and they're all taking a photo of Yosemite Falls, which is to the left. That's why they're all there. And I was also taking that picture, and then I realized, actually, that's not where the action is. The action is over here, where this beautiful streaming light is coming through. And, you know, so I spent a good amount of time just trying to find this spot here. And I guess what it means for me, I've always loved this idea of the light filtering through the trees, the leaves, and in this case, through the mist from the waterfall. You know, if we think about the seasons, this is, you know, the light has emerged through the darkness, right? We've endured whatever the darkness of winter has happened. And now spring is here. And spring brings with it the light. It brings with us the blooms. It brings with us, you know, all these things. But for me, the magic is in the light. both as a real thing, but also as a metaphor for wisdom or for purity or grace or the divine, however you want to think about it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, well, so that now leads into summer.
Summer.
Yay for summer. And one of the first ones that you picked was the little red boat. So tell me about why you picked that one. What does that mean to you?
Sure. We were in these little islands near Bali in Indonesia, and I had borrowed my friend's drone just to kind of mess around with. And, I love this shot. In fact, this is the shot I have as my screensaver on my home computer. I love the perspective of it. But the thing I love most about it is all the boats are white, except for this one boat, which is red. And, having kind of grown up feeling isolated or grown up feeling different than other people I guess just different. I identify with that red boat. And so the title of this one is called The Red One. And it's a little bit of a mystery, not everybody gets it. But I think what it means to me is this feeling of just uniqueness or separation. In fact, the boat is even pointing in a different direction than most of the other boats. And I think that's where it starts, because the truth is I'm not that separated. I'm not that different from everybody else. We're all doing kind of the same thing, floating on the water of life, on the waves of life. And so part of my journey in this lifetime is to realize that while I may be unique, I'm not that different than everybody else. And so to seek out connection. So thinking about summer is a time of growth. It's a time of joy. It's a time of soaking up the sun and really deeply living. And for me, it's kind of letting go of some of that. Maybe it's a different season that feels that isolation, but embracing the connection that exists.
Lovely. And fun and play, right?
Yeah.
Like, as you say. So then we move into this beautiful image of the waterfall and the running river. So summer again, the life of summer. Tell me what that image reflects to you.
Sure. This is in Central Oregon, and we found this beautiful waterfall and just kind of raging torrent of a stream or a mini river. And I was essentially standing at the edge, kind of in the water as close as I could get without being kind of swept away. And there was something powerful about just the energy of the water, right? You can see it all kind of flows into this really concentrated channel. And I'm just right on the edge of it. And there's something frankly thrilling about standing there. Like, part of why I enjoy photography is the adventure of it. I mean, even getting to that spot was kind of dangerous. The rocks were super mossy and slick, and it maybe wasn't the smartest thing to do, but, I was drawn to do it, all to then capture this combination of peace. The trees and the valley are fairly static and calm and mist covered. And then this change, this raging river. And I think this also is a metaphor for us. There's times when we're really in the flow, and sometimes that flow is joyous, if we're rafting down a river and we're a little bit in control. And sometimes the flow we're out of control, and it could be really dangerous. If I got swept away into the rocks, I'm not going to get killed, but it's also probably going to ruin my day to have me and my camera be, in the water. And so navigating our lives, navigating the movement between peace and activity and knowing what's good for us in the moment, I think is also, reminds me of summer.
It also feels, just even what you said, a time of testing.
Yeah, that's right.
Testing our capacity, our values, our being out in life. What does that mean? Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that, being out in life, the closer we get to the action, the more potential for danger, but also the more potential for growth. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, we could hide in the dark, we could hide in the quiet, but that's usually not where our growth lies. Our growth lies in the bravery. Our growth lies in the adventure, whether it's facing our fears or facing our emotions, or, even in this conversation, facing the idea of death and dying. This is where the growth happens. And so, I like this idea of being brave and being kind of in the water when it makes sense for us.
Well, I've shared with you that I'm a licensed glider pilot, which means being in a plane with no engine. And so there's a lot of strategy involved, because that plane won't stay up unless you align with, but sometimes you'll be up for 5 minutes and then it's like a sled ride down, and other times you'll be cradled in the element, but you really face a lot in yourself. And it can be a smooth ride or a turbulent one, but it really deepens an understanding of your own connection to life, right. Being cradled in the elements that way, right? So
That's right. There's an awe that happens. My friend Dr. Keltner's written a book on awe, and one of the experiments they've done is really interesting. They take people that are in a city and looking at a city scene and ask them to draw, even if they can't draw, like even stick figures, like draw the scene and put yourself in the scene, or draw a picture of yourself. They're given different prompts. And usually they draw themselves quite large, but when people are in nature, or even if they're looking at a scene in nature, they make themselves quite small. And there's something about awe, which it reduces our own ego and allows us to see the grandeur of life and realize that we're smaller. We're part of this big thing. And we have more of a sense of awe typically when we're out in nature. And you could describe awe, some people might describe it as just something we don't really understand, or we're overcome with emotions that we don't really understand. I think of it as the divine. When we're in the presence of the divine, this is a type of awe. And for me, clearly, nature and being in nature is a direct path to that awe.
Well, and then we move in from the turbulent river and the strength of the waterfall into the image at the dock.
Yes. This one is in Western Ireland. My son and friend and I were on this day, we were about to embark on a 350-mile bike ride across the west coast of Ireland. And I knew that there was this spot, and it's only good if it's super quiet. But it had been raging windy, the 3 days before. And I thought, oh, there's not much chance. But on this morning, it was perfect. And so I was there, 100% by myself. There was no one around, no one on the roads. And just this peace that happened, knowing that it was probably going to be windy 15 minutes later. But this reminds me of just this sense of peace. And how I think about this is like, oh, on a summer day, I just want to run down this pier and do a big cannonball, like a kid into the water. And as a kid, partly what I wanted to do that to disturb the water. I want to make some waves. And as an adult, I appreciate both the calm and the waves. But this is a really special scene for me.
Beautiful. And then the final one on summer, which is a bit of a different location. I believe it's Death Valley, and you called it Curves. So yes. Again, the reflection around summer and the imagery, that's sand, I'm assuming, because it's the desert, right? So
that's right. Yeah, this is in Death Valley in Southern California. And these sand dunes are always moving, just always in transition. And it's interesting. I mean, when we really think about the universe, everything is moving. We just don't see it. Like even a plate of glass is a liquid, really. That glass is moving. Like if you came back 1,000 years later, if it hasn't broken, it would be fatter at the bottom than it was at the top. Those particles are moving down. And then some things like water, we see moving all the time, but sand is, it's ground. We're walking on it. But just like water, it's in constant movement that we can see. If we came back, a day later or a year later or 5,000 years later, these dunes are going to be completely different. And for me on this day, there was not a footstep, there was not anything else, just the sand. And so even the elements like sand, like silicon, are in movement. They're in expression. They're in, again, in kind of a state of awe, right? If all of these sand particles had just been flat and we're just, walking on them, for me, okay, I'm probably not going to take a picture of that. But something about the way these shapes are leads me to think of something very sensual, very organic, very just beautiful. So.
I hadn't thought of sand, the movement of sand. That's interesting.
Yeah.
It is in constant flux and movement like life, right?
That's right. That's right.
So that then leads us into, and you've touched on it all the way through, because I'm actually fascinated by nature photographers. I've been obsessing about them. I feel I should take it up myself, to be honest. But one of the things a lot of photographers, including yourself, have talked about is perspective. Even like when you went to take the image of the sunflower, where everyone else might take the front, you took the back. So I just want to lead us into that reflection around perspective. And one of the first images that we decided to highlight that you love is the one you title Yin and Yang. So in the desert again. Tell me about that one and perspective around that. Yeah,
I love this. I don't know if anybody else loves it, but I love it. And ultimately that's why I do it. I'm just trying to entertain myself. And so if I look at this picture, there's almost this straight line that separates the light and the dark. Right? Essentially, the sand looks exactly the same on both sides. But because of how the light shines, it looks completely different. And you can even see this path where someone has walked, and you see it walking in the light and creates this little black trail. And then over on the left, you see someone who's walked in the dark, but it somehow catches the light, and you see the path continue. Or you see the little ridges on the dark side. They're very clear. They're very contrasty, but you don't see those same ridges on the other side. They've been washed away with the light. And so to me, there's this beautiful harmony of the yin and the yang. And again, it's about perspective. The sand is exactly the same. The same little ridges exist on both places. The same trail exists on both places. But how we see it, how it shows up, is completely different. Completely different. And for me, this is a bigger metaphor about life, right? Our world is so filled with polarity. The left or the right or the this or the that, or pick anything from the news and it's about polarity. The truth is, all of us, regardless of which quote side we're on, 99% we're the same. We're the same. We love our families. We want to be at peace. We want to have, we want our plans to come true, all these things. But because of our perspective, we've come to think of ourselves as so different than the other people. And that divides us. And so this photo for me, on the one hand, reminds me of that division, but it also reminds me of the beauty that exists. It all depends on where we look.
Well, in the coming together in the peak, at the top, and the ridge at the top of the shadow and the light, right? There's that fine, infinite line as they come together. It's quite beautiful.
That's right. Right where we are.
So then moving into the next one, again on perspective, it's so fascinating because on your website, you have you love Rumi, you use the Rumi quotes a lot. And on this one, I believe it was taken in Arizona. And you have the quote about...
I say the wound is the place where the light enters you.
And what's interesting is you're like the third or fourth person in this series of conversations that has spoken to and highlighted that quote. And so tell me about, like, the inside of that cave is stunning. So tell me about that and the other perspective from the outside.
Sure. For sure. This is Antelope Canyon in northern Arizona, in Page, Arizona. And, again, perspective. If you were walking along the top, it's kind of rolling desert. In fact, you can't see that there's even a hole unless you get right on it. You have to know exactly where to go. And the only way to go there is a guided tour. So you have to know. And like a lot of things in life, you sometimes have to be guided to the truth. You have to be guided to the beauty. Otherwise, you see nothing. You see what everybody else sees. And then when you're there, there's special conditions, right? It needs to be at a certain time of day to get these light beams, flowing through. And so this knowledge of when these beams are going to be there. And then honestly, to get this shot, you kind of have to stir up the dust. So there's something beautiful about, the dust is always there. It's always in the air, but you don't see it until the light comes. So there's a lot of things at play here. And then this idea of Rumi. So first of all, it's not a surprise to me that Rumi and Hafez, another Persian poet, are so popular right now, because both of them speak to a truth that is universal, but it's also vague enough that it doesn't get associated with a specific spiritual path or religion. Because if we had attributed the quote to maybe a more well-known religious leader or, spiritual leader, some people might kind of just like put up a gate because, I can't hear that because they're not from my religion. But when we use the same thing from Rumi or Hafiz, it opens hearts. It opens hearts because we're able to feel it in a way that's really powerful. Both Rumi and Hafiz have a way of speaking about things in a way that slips right past the mind. It doesn't always make sense to the mind, but it makes sense to soul, that deepest part of us. And it resonates. These words resonate with us. So the wound is the place where the light enters you. What does that mean? The wound is the place where the light enters you. To me, it's another way of saying, sometimes when we hurt, when we suffer, this is when we learn the most. Mm-hmm. This is when we can have awe. This is when humility can take place. This is when the divine can enter us. And embracing that wound and seeing it as, maybe this is good for me at some level. Even if it's not physical or mental, emotionally, but good for me spiritually, then I can fully embrace it and see the beauty that exists.
Well, and I clearly, over the years of working in hospice, have seen that with individuals at some of the toughest moments, there can be an opening in the dying process as they prepare to leave this world, and just the most breathtaking beauty, even in the silence, comes in and emanates from them. Their heart's opening to the journey ahead or the journey that they're in, or healing happens that wasn't expected. It's quite profound, actually, to be immersed in this work and see that kind of transformation. Because often when we think of death, we think of, darkness or ugliness. But just like you as a photographer looking for beauty, it's everywhere if you open to it, right? So
That's right.
Lovely. Okay, so that leads us then into perspective. We've talked about perspective, and now we're going to go into some of the less popular at times seasons of life, of autumn and winter, but still rich on so many levels. And as you mentioned, you're from Kansas, and you're a family of farmers. And in your book, The Full Body Yes, you share a story of when you were a child. I feel like we're going into the Wizard of Oz because it's Kansas and tornadoes, So, but can you share with me the story as a young boy of the tornado coming and your perspective, and then witnessing and observing your father around? Because autumn is a time of harvest, right? And
that's right.
Reaping what we've sown.
That's right. So one It was, summer, late summer, near harvest time. This incredible storm came, and we came, the sky was just churning, and we were on alert for tornadoes because the sky had turned green, like this color of green I've only seen a handful of times in my life. And the clouds were moving in every direction all at once. They were just churning like ocean waves and quickly. And so we were watching the sky, and then it started, to rain really heavily, like big pelting drops of rain. And it did that for a bit. And then the rain turned to hail. Mm-hmm. First little pea-sized hail. And I'm at the big picture window in our farmhouse just watching, just like it was theater, and it looked like peas were jumping out of the grass, and then you hear this kunk, kunk out on the outbuildings, in the farm. And the hail got bigger and bigger and bigger until they were probably the size of golf balls, between the size of, hotel ice cubes and golf balls. And I thought that was amazing. And, I was just mesmerized by this. I've never seen anything like this before. And so I was 10-ish, and I had this, toy costume football helmet. And so before my mom could catch me and say anything about it, I put on my football helmet and had a bag, and I went out to collect the biggest ones. And as soon as I got out there, I could hear her shouting at me, but I'll come in when I've got what I want. And so I came in, I had this big bag of the biggest, hailstones. And 5, 10, 15 minutes later, it's all done. But I kept those hailstones for months. I had them in a little frozen bag. And it was so exciting, showing my sister these hailstones and talking about it. And it wasn't until later that I really watched my father, because he was spending a lot of time outside on the porch, and he wasn't, very excited about it. He didn't want to really see my hailstones that I was showing him. Because while for me, it was a bit of meteorological theater and so exciting and the best thing that happened all summer, for him, what it meant was a destruction of his plans. Mm-hmm. Because what he knew was that his crops, which were just, in some cases for the wheat, it was just a couple weeks until harvest. Mm-hmm. For the fall crops that were just knee high, they were all gone. Mm-hmm. They had all been beaten down into the ground, which meant that for a farmer, what happens is you work all year and you get paid twice a year. Once in the summer when you harvest wheat, and once in the fall when you harvest, in our case, soybeans and corn and milo. And in fact, all of it was gone.
Wow. And
so for him, it was this feeling of everything that he had worked for that entire year had just been wiped out in 10 minutes. And possibly not knowing, maybe there was still some hope that in some far-flung, region of our farm, the plants had survived, but it looked bad. It looked really bad. There was destruction all around us. And over the next few hours, I became aware of his perspective, and kind of watched him carefully. And over the next few days, he didn't stay in that funk for very long. He would say, my mom would fret and say, what are we going to do? And he said, it's all right. We'll figure it out. We always have. We'll figure it out. He was very much the optimist, very much, let's look forward. What can we do now? And it was fine. He always did figure it out. He always was successful. And so for me, thinking back now as an adult, being about the same age now as he was then, have a real appreciation of what that would look like if I lost a year's worth of earnings in 10 minutes. How would I react to that? Would I have the same level of optimism and moving forward capability?
Well, in the contrast to the little boy who's in the spring of life, playing out with the hailstones or the hail coming down and enjoy, not really feeling the weight of the responsibility and how the elements have just changed the picture because it's out of control.
That's right. It's out of our control.
So and sometimes we have bounty of harvest, and other times it can be a devastation. So I know your father has since died, but was a profound influence on your life to just to even honor his memory
Mm.
in this moment. And what was your father's first name?
Edward.
Ed. So what is something that you can think of this moment that your father taught you about the season of harvest and autumn that you incorporate into your life now?
Well, a couple lessons he always would share and live was the one I shared about it's going to be fine. Like whatever happens, and what was behind that is if you do the hard work, good things will happen to you. It was kind of, grew up in the Methodist church. So it was, whatever you sow, you will also reap. You reap whatever you sow. In other words, you'll get out of life what you put into it. And not only, so we learned to work hard. I learned to work hard at a young age. We all learned to work hard. There were 5 kids. I'm the youngest. But more than just working hard, he really stressed attitude. That a good attitude will basically make you successful along with the hard work. It was simple advice. And there's something about that, if we think about the seasons of planting, whatever we put out in the world, we'll get back. If you put out hard work, if you put out a good attitude, then you'll receive when it's harvest time.
And if you don't receive what you thought.
And if you don't receive, you'll figure it out. You'll get the next one, right? Because over the long run, life will treat you right. The good you'll get out of life what you put into it.
Well, and as we were preparing for this and reflecting on the seasons, we also talked about the elements. Fire, wind, water, air. All of them. We don't have control over the elements, so
That's
we
true.
can do the best we can. But they come in and create their own dance to teach us lessons. And as you say, if we're open to it, can be refined by it, right?
Yeah.
It's the same in a glider. You can go up and go up forever. And then other times we call it a sled ride. That plane is not staying up in the air, but you still need strategy to get it down.
That's right.
Because it doesn't have a motor, right? And you have one chance to land. So it's interesting.
And here I live in California now for the last almost 30 years. And, we have fire. And one of the amazing things about the big pine trees, about the big redwoods, is that they require fire for the seeds to grow. They require the heat of fire every once in a while to clear the brush and to open the seed so that it can grow. And so there's this purification that happens through the fire, through the wound, through the pain in our life. But that thing allows, not in spite of, it creates the growth that we have.
Yeah, the resiliency. I'm in Canada, in British Columbia, and I went into the interior of BC a few weeks back, and I went through an area that had forest fires a few years ago, and I was amazed at the new growth that was already popping up, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so the images that you picked for autumn leading into that, the bells. And just so tell me, you've gotten 2 different perspectives and 2 images. So start with the first and move into the second and why each speaks to you in different ways.
Well, I went on this trip to photograph the maroon bells, which is not this shot. And so this shot is this amazing sky. I was pointed in the exact opposite direction. And I'm shooting sunrise. We're there with my nephew who's in his 30s, who has, guided us to this spot. And the sky is okay. And this is part of being a landscape photographer. You never know what you're going to get, right? You're there for sunrise. Sometimes the sky cooperates. Sometimes it just does not. But what was happening behind us, which is this shot, is that the sky was amazing. All these pastels and purples and blues and this streak of light on the clouds. And so I put my focus over there, just trying to capture the sky and then looking for what else can I capture here? And I spent some time just finding it. And then in the next shot is the maroon bells. This is why we came. It's one of the most photographed scenes in the world. And on this day, it's okay. Like, it's still a pretty good shot. It's not what I wanted. The sky is kind of gray and doesn't have the same color. It's still beautiful. And so there's several things in here that are important to me. One is this idea that you take what life gives you. You take what life gives you. Now, if I could have my way, I would have had the sky from the first picture over, the rocks, the bells in the second picture. But instead, it's like, instead of getting angry or frustrated about it, it's like, no, this is what we've got. And so, like my dad, what's the best you can do today? With what you've got, what's the best you can do today? And these two photos have now a really powerful meaning for me, because my nephew, Joel, who guided us and was with us there, and then we went hiking up into the bells later. He passed away about 6 months later. He was backcountry skiing not far from here, and got caught up in an avalanche.
Wow.
And even though he did, quote, everything right and was safe, it didn't work out that day, and he lost his life. And so this was a really good adventure with Joel, and it's now a memory of him and just the way that he lived every day, taking what life gave.
Well, that's beautiful. I don't think you shared that before as you showed me the photographs. So that's a beautiful memory and legacy for him, right? So
yeah.
And also in those images, bridging to that and the death of this young man, there's color in autumn, which is interesting because it's when the leaves are dying, they're the most colorful, right? So I always, my platform is In Autumn's Cocoon. And one of the reasons I picked autumn was because we think again of death as just this gray, awful. And yet here, the leaves are the most colorful as they're letting go and dying and cocooning in. And when people are dying, they cocoon in often, or in grief, they cocoon in. And so, warm fires and pumpkin spice lattes and blankets. How do we bring the comfort of each other and hold space to be nurtured as things are dying around us? The invitation is, as it's shifting into winter, how do we invite people in a loving way to hold in the transition, in its challenge and its brilliance and beauty, right? So,
yes. And in nature, sometimes what happens is, depending on the temperature, depending on the amount of sugar in the plants and how they've done, the leaves can be different colors. Sometimes they go right from green to brown. Sometimes they're golden yellow or bright yellow. Sometimes they're an orange or a maroon or a bright, brilliant red. And even within the same tree, you can have a spectrum of that color. And so I guess thinking about these seasons, it's an invitation to see the beauty as people are transitioning from summer to winter. And some people transition more gracefully. Some people have a beauty that shines more brightly during that time, with whatever they're learning or experiencing in that moment.
Well, and even on that, the last image that you picked for autumn is kind of unique and plays to that because of, speak to it.
Yeah, sure. There's this grove of aspen trees. Again, this is also Colorado and Western Colorado. And I look at these trees and it makes me wonder, what happened to you? And I almost don't want to know. I don't know what the answer is. I don't think I want to know. I don't want the science behind it. I just want the mystery, were they hit by an avalanche? Did a flock of gnomes or something sit on them in a certain way to create these little seats? But it's so playful. It reminds me of a Dr. Seuss forest, here. But there's just something, this image for me just creates something magical and whimsical, but also poignant and beautiful and powerful. because no matter what happened with these trees, like they're in it together, right? It happened to them together. And so here they are. And you know what? If they were all straight, no one would make their way to this little grove of trees. No one would have gotten up at 4:30 in the morning to take this picture. But it's because, not in spite of, it's because whatever they went through has made them beautiful that they're of interest to the rest of us.
Lovely. Okay, so that leads into winter.
Oh, winter.
But you can have fun in winter. You can go skiing, or I used to live in central Canada, and in Ottawa, they had a canal frozen in the middle of the city, and we would go skating on the canal outside. So there can be joy in winter, but often it's a turning in and a survival. And so talk to me about the first image that you picked for your winter reflection.
A hiker in kind of around Death Valley, in the entry point of Death Valley. And I call this one solitude. And so this person is, what are they doing? I always think about, are they emerging from the darkness? Are they going from this darkness into another form of darkness? There's something beautiful about where they've been, and also a mystery about where they're going. They've emerged in kind of this transition place, and they're by themselves. And sometimes in winter, no matter what we've harvested, no matter who we've been with, the final steps are by ourselves. The final steps are by ourselves before renewal. And there's something else that this photo reminds me of. It reminds me of my friend Giles. I had a friend Giles in college. I mentioned that I kind of grew up by myself. I grew up in nature. And I didn't have that many close friends, but I had a best friend in college. And I was really grateful for that connection. And then I left college. I was out in the world for a year, and he had stayed to get a graduate degree. And then I got a phone call that he had passed away. He had taken his own life. And for some reason, this photo reminds me of him, of walking this path, of both the dark and the light. And, it's kind of, I don't know what else to say about it other than I find it very poignant.
Okay, let's move into the next one then. Honoring his memory and all that was stirred, not only for his heart, but for you, and integrating his loss and your grief, right? So is it Lake, Convict Lake?
Convict Lake.
Convict Lake.
There's a story there. You have to look that one up.
I'm sure there is. Yeah. Just by the title alone, right?
Yeah, sure. This is near Mammoth Mountain or Bishop, California, in southeastern California. We had gone skiing the day before, I think it was Halloween. And then I was on a photography adventure this morning at Dark 30. And I found this little lake, and I just loved all of the nooks and crannies. I love the rocks in the water, the very still water, this little bolt of golden leaves, but also the lone tree, the lone pine tree in the middle of all of that. And even the way the sunrise is now touching the top of the mountain, and also reflected by the top of the mountain in the water, for me just creates an interesting alchemy. The plants have all kind of faded away, or they're about to. It's cold, it's freezing cold on this morning, and everything's in transition, but there's still this total beauty in the transition.
Lovely. Well, and then that leads into the cathedrals. I have this thing. I love the ocean. I'm by the ocean. I have mountains in BC. I have the ocean, but I have this thing about trees and mountains. I don't know the strength of them and how rooted they are. They're just, especially when I would fly around the mountains or hike in the mountains, there's a strength to them. So the cathedrals in winter, in the starkness of winter, there they are, and their strength still, right?
Yes. These rocks are amazing. This is in Yosemite, in Yosemite Valley. These rocks are called the cathedrals. You know, and you can see how cold it is. The water is freezing or near freezing. There's ice. There's these beautiful lines. Even in something that's not beautiful, these lines of the kind of the frozen soil next to the water create these beautiful shapes. And here in the background are these powerful mountains that have been eroded over, you know, it's granite. They've been eroded over the last however many millions of years. And here's the sunrise on the tops of them with the snow-capped quiet, right? Quiet and strength, a strength that is eternal.
Well, that's a beautiful image to move into the next conversation we're going to have about compassion and compassion in general. But also, I just want to say, with the light at the top of winter, winter can be, as you say, a time of introspection. It's a time of survival, often of regrouping, of reflecting, but also letting go. The tree of winter has let go all of its leaves. But spring, as you said, with the light there, it comes after. I remember one time being on the palliative care unit, and it was a very heavy shift. And I think a couple of people, I can't remember all the details, but a couple of people had died that I'd connected with, and the families were distraught. And then we were welcoming other people in, and I felt a weight in my heart. It was stunning and moving, but the heaviness of it, and I thought, you know, am I going to be able to still do this with the volume of death? And I got on the elevator, and as I'm going down the elevator, the doors opened to the maternity floor. And there was this young couple with a brand new baby, and instantly my heart just opened. And it was the orchestration of something greater saying, remember, the cycles continue of birth and death. And so it was a magical moment, because they just came on to the elevator with such joy and this new life. And it reminded me of the seasons and cycles of life.
Sure.
And
that's right. And even those cycles are present with us all the time. I mean, we have the solar seasons, you know, we're all in spring at the same time, at least in the same hemisphere. But in our lives, you're right, there can be, all things are true, essentially. All things are true. You read the news and there's, you know, all these terrible things happening in the world. And at the same time, there's amazing things happening in the world. There are birthday parties and births and joys and marriages, and, you know, there's beauty every day. And so it's all true. And so our ability to be able to hold that and to realize that it all is true and to be with it is really powerful to our own joy, our own internal joy.
So I want to weave that in now into your work initially at LinkedIn. As head of mindfulness and compassion in the workplace, and now changing the work from the inside out. Define for me what you mean by compassion, and for the audience in general.
Sure. Lots of good definitions. I like this one. So for me, compassion starts with capacity. So because our capacity ebbs and flows all the time, moment by moment, but the capacity for three things. The first is to have awareness of other people, and so our capacity to have awareness of them. The second is to have a mindset of kindness towards them, or a mindset of wishing the best towards them. And then the third is the capacity to have the courage to take action. Whatever that means, and that may mean very different things in every different situation. But so it's awareness, it's a mindset of kindness, and the ability or the courage to take action.
Okay, so I want to take that, weave it into the seasons of life that we've just talked about, specifically talking about autumn and winter, death, dying, and grief, and how that flows into compassion in the workplace. And before we sort of answer that in a more straightforward way, in your book again, and within your life, you were living in Japan at one point at one point in your career. And an event happened with your wife. Can you tell me what happened? And
Sure.
what your response was getting the news in the workplace?
So we were living in Japan. We were in our early 30s. We had a 4-year-old son, or maybe 3 at the time. And my wife was pregnant. Mm-hmm. And, in Japan, it's a very different work culture than in Silicon Valley. It's one of those places where you're just meant to be in the office. Like FaceTime is very important. Being in the office is very important. And I was a senior person. I was in charge of half of the office, and I felt this weight. But I was also very young. And in Japan, it's super hierarchical based on how old you are. Mm. And I was very young for the title that I had, let's say. And I also felt this need to prove myself that I could lead, even though I was a foreigner and didn't speak the language as well as I would have liked, that I was younger than my title, and so I had this desire to prove myself. And there was this dinner event where a lot of the partners that we needed, and I felt like I needed to be successful, were going to be at this dinner event. We'd been trying to get a hold of them for a long time. They finally were able to make it. And so it was scheduled for that night. It was a high stakes event. And during the day, my wife had called me, a couple times, and at first she wasn't sure, but then it sounded like she had lost the baby. And I didn't know what to do with that. I felt myself a little bit frozen, and I asked her if she was fine. She's like, "Yeah, I'm fine. Do what you need to do." And I took her at her word, and so I went to this event, and now with the benefit of time, I can see that this was not the right decision. First of all, if we think about awareness, I had no awareness of the trauma that she was facing, of what she was going through, about having lost this child that was inside of her. I had no idea how hard that was on her. I was only thinking about myself, and in my perspective, the truth of it was, at that time, I wasn't sure if I was ready for a second child, in that space in our life. So there was a part of me that was relieved and actually, felt fine about it. And so I was acting from this place of for sure, self-centeredness, or just thinking about myself. So I went to the event, and the whole night I felt kind of, gross and miserable. I knew that, I knew that I should probably leave, but it just never worked out. And so of course it had repercussions over the long term, for 20 years for that decision. And it all comes back to compassion. Did I have awareness of what she was going through? No. Did I have a mindset of wishing the best for her? No, I was thinking about myself. And did I have courage to take action? No, I did not. Because I didn't have the awareness to know what action to take. So these are the things that happen to us, both small and large, every day of our lives. Or do we really know what's going on with people? And do we act in service of the whole? Or are we so self-absorbed in our own stuff that we're acting just on our own behalf?
Well, and so then that leads beautifully into my next question. How do you think organizations normalizing all the seasons of life, including, seasons involving death and dying and grief, could help to make the workplace more compassionate?
I think for leaders and people in charge of policies is to really deeply understand people, right? And I see a lot of good behavior here, and I still see some bad behavior here. At my last company, I found it was very enlightened. And if someone said, "Oh, my so-and-so that I care about just passed away," the answer for them would be, "Look, there's a policy. There's always a policy, and the policy was decent, but the message from the manager was, okay, great, take whatever time you need, the work will be here when you get back. So just let us know how we can support you. Take the time you need. We'll take care of things while you're gone. And, I will tell this story. And then there's other places who they'll say, oh yeah, well, my mother passed away and they gave me 48 hours and I had to be back at work. Mm-hmm. Like, well, yeah, there's a policy and they manage to the letter of the law. And the difference between these two, not only policies, but the way the managers treated it, made an extraordinary difference on how both of these employees felt about their work. Mm-hmm. And so in the long term, this is, for me, conscious business and compassion is all about the long term and the whole. In the long term, when we treat people compassionately, we're going to get better results. They're going to be more loyal. They're going to work harder and have better results when we treat them with honor and respect versus just as a resource that can be maximized. So this is just one example, but it's this ethos that's behind the idea of compassion. Because when I think about mindfulness and compassion, mindfulness is an individual sport. It's what happens with each of us as we close our eyes and we do whatever practice we go inside with. But compassion is how we interact with each other. It's how we do everything. How we treat our customers, how we build products, how we service products, how we treat each other. And so everything we do in the world of business, you can apply this lens of compassion, apply this lens of conscious business and make it be, either quote, worse or better for the whole. And I think that, I know that we get better results as a company when we do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I was going to ask you how you would implement those changes to honor the seasons. And you've already touched on it, because inevitably, and even during COVID and emerging out of COVID, we've got the remnants of grief or loss or systems breaking down. And if we just pretend that season doesn't exist, right, it's still at play. So so I'm grateful for you in the work that you're doing now to even come in on an individual level to face this conversation and truth about life, because nobody's getting out of this one. It's a leveler. Doesn't matter what religion, what culture, what belief, what
That's right.
point of view. We are all born. We attempt to love and connect, and then we die. It's going to happen, right? So how do we honor that in all capacities? So I'm just really grateful that you've chosen to do this, to even stimulate the awareness and dialogue of this, bring it to the surface a little bit more, right?
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So I have a signature question that I want to finish on before we go into the last image that we've chosen here. And in your work, in changing the work from the inside out and the beautiful things that you did for compassion and mindfulness at LinkedIn, but also in this beautiful photography we've woven in, how has your heart been changed, or has it been changed by the work you've been called to do?
Yeah, good question. So part of it is, for the last 5 years, my job has been around mindfulness and compassion. So it's something I'm thinking about all the time. So just having it be present in my life, makes me want to live it more, because I'm very aware that other people are watching me to see how I behave or how I do. And so that has held me, it allows me to hold myself to a higher standard. In addition to just thinking about it all the time. How do we do this? How do we practice it? How do we put it in practice? Has extended my own practice because it's what I'm focused on. And so by nature, if I'm focused on something, 100% of the time versus once in a while, energy is going to flow where that attention goes. So my own practice, my own level of compassion and mindfulness has deepened through this time. And part of that, I've come to realize that the deeper you go, the further you realize you have to go. You start realizing, there's a never-ending trail here, but it's definitely worth the effort.
Well, and compassion for ourselves, for doing the best we are able to do in this moment, right? I mean, I'm in my early 60s now, and I've been in my own sort of winter of life reflection. I'm starting to feel like I don't know anything. Like everything is starting to be seen from a new set of eyes as I kind of just go deeper into the rhythm and seasons of life. And I'm in this new one that it has become the richest season I've ever been in, actually. I'm finding this time in my life the most fascinating in many ways.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
So our final image before we close out, you showed me this beautiful one. It was actually, you said it was in winter.
It is.
And so tell us about it and the light that comes in. It's again, winter, spring follows. So this image seems to capture it so profoundly.
Sure. This is in Big Sur in the central coast of California. And there's this keyhole rock. And for about 2 or 3 weeks around the winter solstice every year, the light shines through like this. And for so many reasons, I just find this amazing. You know, you've got, on the one hand, the metaphor, you know, in the depths of winter, right? The winter solstice, the darkest time on the planet. But in the depths of winter, the light shines through. Mm-hmm. In the depths of winter, the light shines through. And I love this image because it makes me want to go into the light, right? I'm drawn into that beam of light, and you kind of see it through the keyhole where it's just radiant on the other side, but you can't quite see exactly what's there. You know, you can see that it is light, but you can't see the light, you know, the source of it. And I think that's a really interesting metaphor for us as well, as we're searching for truth, as we're searching for deeper meaning in our lives, we're drawn to something. Mm. And so for me, this is what I'm drawn to.
It's beautiful. Beautiful. And as you said, in the darkest time, there's the light, and after winter comes spring.
That's right.
Spring always comes. So thank you so much for doing this with me, Scott, and sharing your breathtaking photography. And I just want to share with the audience that if you want to learn more about Scott and his present work in changing work from the inside out, or his wonderful book, The Full-Bodied Yes, and his photography, you can go to scottshute.com. And my understanding too is many of the proceeds from your photography go to support a charity. Right?
That's right.
So,
in fact, I donate 100% of my photography sales to an organization locally. Well, it's nationally called NAMI, N-A-M-I. They help people get the mental health resources that they need. Nice.
Beautiful. Well, again, thank you. And I honor you for the great work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Pleasure to share this with you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay. And for everyone watching, I just want to remind you that you can subscribe to this channel and it will open you up to a library of amazing conversations with noted guests in end-of-life care to learn more about this season and how to better traverse it and grow in the midst of sensitive and challenging times. And you can also go to inautumnscocoon.com for future workshops and events if you're interested. Thank you again, Scott, and thank you for all the audience who has been with us today.